Yep.
All right, Tim.
All right, we should be live right now. Here, live talking Penske, and probably one of the biggest buyouts, at least in motorsports history. And across sports, that's something else to talk about. I want to lead off here with a little bit of a factoid and a figure because I think I really need to put this into perspective. The Holmans bought the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1945. That was before the formation of NASCAR in 1948, MotoGP in 1949, Formula One in 1950, the NHRA, National Hot Rod Association, in 1951, and even the National Basketball Association in 1946. The Roger Penske buying it yesterday is only the fourth owner in the history of the Speedway, and if you can imagine it, the Holman reign has lasted or longer than many sports organizations have been in existence. So what happened yesterday is one of the most significant business deals to happen, certainly in motorsports. And I can honestly think of no better person to talk about this with than our pal, friend of the show, Adam Stern. Adam, welcome. Big day yesterday, huh?
Yesterday was an epic day. It started off pretty early. As the captain does, he gets right on it in the morning, and so sure enough, that thing was sent at 8 p.m. I looked back today in my inbox, and it was 8 p.m. sharp on the dot. And so yeah, the day got started off pretty early, pretty quickly, and just epic. And I'm sure we'll talk about it tonight about how it didn't really come out beforehand and things like that, and that happened for a multitude of reasons. I know on my end, and I'm sure probably for a couple other reporters as well. But yeah, no question, a crazy day, epic day. I think a lot of people feel like a great day for the sport. So I look forward to talking about it.
So again, it's kind of incredible. You went from, or the Indianapolis Motor Speedway had four owners in the first 50 years, or four ownership groups. Obviously, starting with Carl Fisher, moving on to Eddie Rickenbacker, who then sold it to the conglomerate that was headed up by Tony Holman, and it's been going for nearly 75 years with one family. And now Roger Penske, as you said, buying it. This is this is something I've been mulling. Maybe some of the ABA NBA merger or the AFL NFL merger, but those are mergers, and I believe those were publicly traded companies as well. These are two private entities making this transaction. I mean, what's kind of your feelings as a writer for the Sports Business Journal? I mean, where does this rank?
Well, I can tell you, we have a print magazine, and I think this thing has a good chance of being on our print magazine next week as the cover. Just to give you an idea of the gravity of this decision. It's not every week that motorsports is on the cover of Sports Business Journal. I think the last time we had something on the cover was about Jim France and his new role after he had taken over for his nephew, Brian France, after the DUI last year. So, in terms of all of sports, I mean, here's what's interesting about it is, we're hearing the deal, probably went for somewhere. I'm still trying to confirm this. I have some people to talk to tomorrow, so hope to kind of get some more confirmed figures tomorrow. But hearing the deal kind of went somewhere in the mid nine figures, probably in kind of the 300 to 400 million dollar range. So when you put in pure dollars perspective, of course, these days when an NBA or NFL franchise trades, or even sometimes NHL, MLB, I mean, these are going for close to $1 billion these days, or more at times. Um, so it's not the biggest deal ever by dollars by any stretch, but certainly when you look at motorsports and you kind of look at the landscape and just how much this is going to change things, who bought it, kind of the sentimental notion, the hard business notion. I mean, just across the board, the conflict of interest questions that some people want to raise. I mean, there's just so many layers to this story that make it kind of a blockbuster that is going to really take weeks, months, and maybe even years to kind of unpack the gravity of and start to see the effects of. I think we'll start to see the effects maybe in certain regards within months, but certainly kind of the long term is going to take it's going to take a couple of years to start seeing him really put his imprint on the place. in terms of kind of his most grand, ideas and things like that. So I think obviously we'll just have to see, how consequential this is. But boy, on the face of it, it feels like it's one of the biggest motorsports deals ever. And relative to all sports, I mean, look, this is the biggest single day sporting event in the world, in the Indy 500, that now is owned by Roger Penske. It was previously owned by one family for more than 50 years. Um, it's just a big deal on so many different levels. So I would put it right up there with some of the biggest sports deals ever. In terms of consequence and importance, it's not the biggest in terms of dollars, but it's a huge deal. And again, even my editors, I can tell you at SBJ, are recognizing absolutely that this is massive news for the entire industry, for the entire state of Indiana, for all of entertainment, depending on how you look at it. So it's a big deal.
Man, I guess I should have clarified. I shouldn't have. When I say biggest, I didn't necessarily mean dollars. Especially, it surprised me when you reported this morning that the figures seem to be, as you said, well under $1 billion, around $300 to $400 million. When you look at other entertainment properties or even other sports properties, more often than not will go for over $1 billion. I think some of that, and I'm sure again we'll kind of talk about that later, has to do with some of the haste that it seemed like the Holman George family wanted to get out of this sport, or get out from underneath the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And obviously, the person who starts the conversation in business, I'm sure you'll be able to confirm here, is usually the guy who has to do most of the concessions in the negotiation process. So them with Tony George coming to Roger Penske and kind of starting that discussion, I'm sure that Roger Penske got the best deal out of this possible. We did have a couple super chats. Elite Flight says none of his messages are showing up in the chat. I'm not really sure why. And then Josh Murphy says Roger Penske is living the life right now, defending NASCAR Cup champion, two-time defending Indy 500 winner, IndyCar champion, Supercars champion, etc. Yeah, he also won. God, I think he won Bathurst 1000. I think he had a sports car win, a couple of them this year. Daryl Parrish is saying everyone report Land David spammer in the chat. Yeah, he is spamming quite a bit, isn't he? But yeah, I should say as well, yeah, I'm definitely going to prioritize reading super chats, but I'm definitely going to also pay attention to the regular chat as well, to see if there's any relevant points brought up that maybe Adam and I are missing. So Adam, this is one thing that I kind of wanted to run by you, and I don't want this to be too much of a blindside, but let's say in a hypothetical world, I am Roger Penske and you are one of my most trusted advisors. What would you do, or what would you say to me right now? I know Roger Penske himself talked that today he's going to be walking around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where it was today, and creating a top 10 list of things that need to be done. If you are the guy who gets to tell Roger Penske at least 3 things that need to be done, whether it's with Holman Racing or the Indianapolis Motor Speedway or the Indy Racing League, as Roger Penske kept calling it, what are some of the things that you think need to be addressed right now, and now can be because of this influx of business moxie that Roger Penske is going to bring to it?
From an IRL perspective, to quote Roger Penske, aka IndyCar, I think, clearly from the league perspective, I think stepping up the marketing is a big thing. Obviously IndyCar is a huge deal in Indianapolis, and it is a huge deal in many cities across the country when they come there. But I think, at times people in IndyCar and the industry overall, not necessarily just the sanctioning body, because so many people are based in Indianapolis, where the sport is huge, at times, you could use the term they get caught in a bubble, or however you want to put it. But Indianapolis, IndyCar is a huge deal there, but it's not quite as big in some other key markets. So I think, first and foremost, just marketing the sport more, doing more events. We're seeing what obviously, look, Formula One has a lot of trouble that they need to work through in the U.S. They're nowhere near as big in the U.S. as they hope they eventually will be or are right now. So IndyCar's in a good position, but you look at what Formula One's trying to do with some of these events that they're holding in, like the major cities in the U.S., kind of these demonstrations, things like that. Now we can talk about how successful those are, but that's just an example of things that IndyCar could look to do from a marketing perspective. They could have a bigger presence in certain regards, a more robust presence in a lot of different kind of platforms and mediums across entertainment than they do right now. Obviously, NBC's helped with some of that this year, that stands to improve. I think secondarily, obviously, you got to invest in Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It's such a gorgeous venue, but obviously it's sort of dilapidated in certain regards. It does stand to see some new investment in, whether it's in the seats, whether it's in the infield. Clearly it's a facility that could take some new investment, and it's a place that should stay around for centuries to come. It's not a place that should ever be replaced, but certainly it could do with some renovation. So, obviously it's such a huge venue that you could make a laundry list of what needs to be renovated or what could be renovated and where you start. So that's almost a whole different conversation. But certainly I think him investing in the facility is clearly huge. And then, maybe as a third thing is just kind of what sort of new things can they do? You heard him reference bringing back Formula One. You heard him reference IMSA. And then you also obviously heard him reference becoming the entertainment capital of Indianapolis, of Indiana. Can
Of
you
the
build
world
some sort of like
of the
mixed
world
use
was a
development?
specific.
Right. So can you build some sort of mixed use development, some sort of greater development inside the facility or right next to the facility, adjacent to it? Um, let's see. I think he's going to have some big plans, and there's probably going to be nothing. Nothing's going to be as big of an announcement as yesterday, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if over the next couple of years here we see them really develop this facility out from a real estate perspective. You know, some of your viewers might have seen what Atlanta Motor Speedway was talking about a couple weeks ago with saying, hey, look, if gambling gets passed, if casinos get passed and legalized in Atlanta, or excuse me, in Georgia, we might try and work with a developer to build like a $1 billion casino resort attached to Atlanta Motor Speedway. Now, I'm not saying necessarily, the Penske's are going to do that, but at the same time, obviously, gambling's getting legalized, sports betting is getting legalized in Indiana. So, could there be a casino built on property? Things like that, I think certainly. Let's watch out to see what they do from a pure real estate perspective. That could be really interesting.
That was one of the things that I don't know if you watched my video, but that was one of the things I thought right off the bat. I think there will be a casino put on the grounds. I mean, it makes too much sense. Again, like you said, it's sports gambling is becoming such an accepted thing these days. I think that's just a no-brainer from a perspective of you want it to be a year-round entertainment facility, bringing in cash. I think that's a no-brainer. I think that will happen. One of the things that I'm really encouraged as a younger person, kind of listening to Roger Penske's comments, is he's really been kind of hammering in the idea of, or has been saying a lot, and Roger Penske's not someone who just says things to say things, social media. Specifically, I don't know if you saw the Yahoo Sports thing that was tweeted out today by IndyCar, but he specifically talked about how many young people he sees in the paddock at the IndyCar races. And if you look at his social media presence, or the social media presence that Team Penske puts out there, with some of the engagement they have with the Penske games and things like that, that are really kind of innovative sports marketing strategies, that makes me very excited, because I think for the first time, like you said, and I think I even said, is that, the IndyCar has kind of been stuck in the 465 bubble, or even the Indy 500 has been stuck there, when it really truly is a global and nationwide event. And I think Penske is going to bring some of that perspective into this, just based on the comments that he has made thus far. We did have another super chat that I currently can't read for some reason. Thanks, YouTube. Good web design here, fellas. We'll get back to it because I need to go open up another tab that can actually read that. So, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more, since you did kind of touch on it. Penske Entertainment Group. What do we know about this? I imagine I believe I remember hearing yesterday that it's a new arm of the Penske Corporation. What do we know about it? Who actually runs it? And do they have any plans for Penske Entertainment outside of auto racing?
That's a great question. I'm still trying to learn some of those details, but to your point, from what you said, my understanding is it appears to be a new subsidiary that was formed specifically for this. Obviously, one of Roger's sons, Jay Penske, runs Penske Media Group, which owns, Variety magazine. Obviously he owns a Formula E team. He's got a whole bunch of interest, but this appears to be something separate that he formed specifically for this. As far as who's going to be, really helping him out and kind of helping run this subsidiary and therefore IndyCar. I think look at the people who were around him yesterday. There was a picture that I saw you tweeted out, and I did as well. It was on the it was a great picture from the IndyCar, or excuse me, IMS media site of Roger Penske out there pointing at something, or moreover, excuse me, Mark Miles, the CEO, pointing at something, and Roger Penske looking at it. And on either side of him, you had Greg Penske, one of Roger's sons, and then on the other side, you had Jonathan Gibson, who is basically his right-hand man from a marketing and sales perspective, which obviously in motorsports is a pretty big deal. And so, I would look for Jonathan to play a big role, honestly, moving forward to IndyCar. I'm not sure if he's going to get a specific title there, but I certainly expect him to play a big role there. And then obviously he's got some of his executives as well who have always been, important at the Penske Corporation, namely Bud Danker and Walt Zarnicki. So, kind of his typical right-hand men, I think, are going to run the organization. And as of right now, it looks like they're planning to largely keep the same executives intact at IMS and IndyCar. We'll see what happens in the long term, but at least that's the initial plan. They're not going to just immediately bring in their own people from the start. So, again, it seems like this is a subsidiary that was just formed essentially for this. So could they do something else? Could eventually Penske become more of a kind of entertainment company in terms of with this subsidiary and do some other stuff? I guess potentially. Again, and they also acquired IMS Productions, which, while they do a lot of motorsports, they actually it's a very good business for what was Holman and Company and now Roger Penske, and they actually help do things in the NBA. They shoot games like for the Los Angeles Lakers and do production for the Los Angeles Lakers amongst other teams. So that's a nice little business as well. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what Penske does and how he leverages his assets. But as far as that entertainment corporation subsidiary, it appears it was just formed for this. And again, I do expect some of his top executives at the Penske Corporation and Team Penske in Jonathan Gibson to kind of play a big role now moving forward in IndyCar. And we'll see if they get kind of official titles at IndyCar or if they stay, just kind of with Penske Corporation. It could go either way, but they're definitely going to make their mark, I feel like.
That was one of the, and I guess it's a morbid topic, but it's one that we need to talk about because Roger Penske is, I believe, 82, 83 years old. And I know from a personal perspective, I know my grandfather only lived to be 85 years old. And so even if Roger Penske is healthy, lives the rest of his life perfectly healthy, he may only have 10 years left at most. What have you heard succession-wise? You mentioned Greg. A lot of people have mentioned Greg Penske as being the heir apparent. Obviously, there's Jay as well, who's been involved in motorsports, still is on the Formula E side, and has been involved in the IndyCar side with his own team. Or would they consider doing what they did with the Penske track system and sell it wholesale to NASCAR sometime down the road? Where do you see this headed, maybe 10 years down the line?
Well, first and foremost, I would not put it past Roger Penske to live another 100 years. I mean, the guy is absolutely incredible. If anyone is going to live to be, 180 years old, it's him. So, God, hopefully he lives for many years to come. And he is an incredible person who I won't put it past to live however long he gets to. But obviously he's said before publicly that, of course, being the great business person he is, it would be crazy if he didn't have a succession plan, at least as far as it related to Team Penske and his businesses. And clearly, I think, his sons are going to be involved. On the Team Penske side, now that he's going to be checking out a little bit and more so running IndyCar, I think you'll see Tim Cindric obviously kind of step up. He's kind of been the president. Does he now become eventually promoted to like the CEO of Team Penske? I could see that. but that doesn't mean his family won't continue to necessarily own it. Of course, they could continue to own it. So yeah, I mean, again, you look at the people who were around him yesterday, and Roger, he has a small circle and a tight circle of senior executives who he trusts and who do a great job for him. And I don't really see him moving away from those guys. So, obviously, again, in terms of who actually is the exact succession plan, I mean, I don't have those details, but it would be surprising if his sons weren't involved. Greg was right there yesterday. Obviously, like you said, Jay is still a good businessman who does some work in motorsports and otherwise in media. So he's got that sort of background that's perfect to help run a sports property. So I don't see any reason why his sons won't continue to be involved. It's amazing how much Roger still runs things himself, and the fact that he just engineered this amazing deal himself, in the past couple of weeks at his age. Of course, we all know, what was it, this year's Rolex 24 or last year? She stayed up the entire 24 hours. I mean, the guy's just a machine. So yeah, I could see him continuing to be in motorsports with a big presence. Kind of managing all the way for another decade or two. I seriously wouldn't put it past that. But yes, clearly he's got a succession plan in place, and while I don't have the exact details, I'll be surprised if his sons aren't involved. That being said, Penske Corporation, and obviously at the end of the day, like, technically Penske Corporation is a family-owned company, but it's a lot different than the Holman George family, where yes, they've been in business for decades, but they weren't this kind of mega conglomerate that has these businesses around the world. I mean, the Penske Corporation is going to continue on for decades, and if not centuries, hopefully as long as the world exists to come, for with that Penske name. So there might even be some people in his succession plan who don't have the last name Penske, because of that. But nonetheless, I certainly expect his sons to be involved.
So, kind of spinning off of that, Michael Jensen sent a $5 super chat and says, for those saying conflict of interest, Tony George has been a part owner of his stepson's Ed Carpenter Racing for years. Also, keep up the great work. Thank you, Michael, and I'm sure that applies to you as well, Adam. But yeah, that's something that kind of made me scratch my head yesterday when it came up, that now of all times, conflict of interest is becoming a talking point in racing, when not only has Tony George obviously been a part of Ed Carpenter Racing, but prior to that actually owned outright his own team with Vision Racing. And then you go back even further, and it surprises me that auto racing writers are asking this question, but championship auto racing teams, the owners literally owned the series that they ran and participated in just 25 years ago. So, can you talk a little bit about this issue? Maybe why it's come up now? Is it just because it's Penske, or is there something a little bit more to this now because of the fact that he now also owns the biggest track in the series?
I think it's a handful of things. I think one, you have an excellent history, and your listeners, and viewers have an excellent knowledge of motorsports history, but not everyone remembers as much about kart as you guys. You're definitely nailing it about kart. I think, obviously, look, secondarily, you're exactly right. I mean, Team Penske is the best team in IndyCar. It's almost a fact at this point to say that. It's almost not even an opinion. So to have the best team owner buy it, Ed Carpenter Racing is not the best team in IndyCar. And so that's where I'm not saying it's necessarily fair or unfair. I think obviously everyone's welcome to their opinion in this case, in all cases. But that being said, I understand why it's come up, but I think you're going to most likely see Roger Penske work pretty hard to try and, make sure that doesn't come up that much in the future. I think he knew it was going to come up at first. But he said he's already stepping down as race strategist, for the team, for Will Power. So he's kind of already taken a step there and announced that. And again, with Cart, I mean, it was a couple people who owned it, right? So it wasn't just Penske. So I think obviously it's a little bit different from that regard. But nonetheless, I do think you're right. I mean, it's not, this is kind of just, motorsports is a little bit different than stick and ball sports. So some people are kind of trying to throw out stick and ball comparisons. Those just don't quite apply. I mean, auto racing is just a little bit different. And I do think that ultimately it's not going to be a concern long term. But look, I mean, let's, who knows? There could be some controversies in certain races down the line where it comes up. And if certain teams feel like, the one thing to watch out for is, if a team ends up kind of getting the raw deal, or a driver gets a raw deal, does someone mouth off and say something about, if a driver gets in a situation where a Penske driver gets benefited in the end, does the driver from the other team end up saying something? Like, that's where it's going to be interesting to see if that ends up coming up in the future. Um, but overall, I think it was bound to come up in this case, and I do think it's fair for people to talk about it and ask Roger Penske about it. But if you listen to his answer, it seemed like it was a pretty good answer. And again, it's just not stick and ball sports. Auto racing is a little bit different, and also at the end of the day, I mean, having this in Roger Penske's hands, I mean, it's a pretty good deal. When you think about some of the other people who could have bought IndyCar, this could have been a steep learning curve over the course of multiple years. We could have seen some major botches and kind of bad things happen, faux pas, et cetera, where, we had some, you've seen kind of it happen with Liberty Media and F1. Um, Liberty Media, and perhaps rightfully so, but they tried to do like the inverse grids for next year. And, ultimately they got vetoed by Mercedes, who said, that goes against the DNA of Formula One. So to have it in Roger Penske's hands, he is the DNA of Indianapolis Motor Speedway and IndyCar, and so I think it's in really good hands. But at the same time, it was always going to be something that would be brought up at first, and as long as he kind of puts the proof in the pudding that there is that clear line where he's not kind of putting his thumbs on the scales for Team Penske, I think hopefully in due course everyone will kind of let that subside.
So yes, you're right. This situation is a little bit different than kart. The kart system operated with a franchise system. So if you wanted a vote on the kart board, you had to buy a franchise, and that included a car entry. Now, what the kart prior to the split, it changed after the split, but prior to the split, you didn't have to be a franchisee to enter races or get a starting spot in the Indy 500, but you weren't able to vote on any of the major issues. You weren't able to say, have a say. And one of the reasons that the split happened was Tony George only was allowed one vote as the owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and one of his major grievances was, I think the Indy 500 is a bigger event than just one vote over the power, where of the direction of the series, and that's kind of where the genesis of the IRL began. Kind of moving off of, or kind of keeping with that point, I should say, another thing that was brought up by Roger himself in that Yahoo Sports thing that was tweeted out by IndyCar, and unfortunately the Yahoo guy misinterpreted what Roger was saying and what Roger was talking about. But he did make a comment that sounded like he was open to adopting a similar model to kart, and specifically referencing NFL franchises, something to help protect the car owners that make an investment in the full series. Now, obviously, Adam, you'll be very familiar with the race team alliance in NASCAR. One of the things that I believe Penske is not only a part of, but one of the kind of important pillars in that. I would suspect, and I'd like to hear your opinion of this, that IndyCar may be moving to a similar franchise system to what we're seeing not only in NASCAR, but as you kind of mentioned earlier, stick and ball sports, and whether or not it actually works, that's up for debate. But that's kind of where I think it may be headed, especially given his comments today.
Yeah, I mean, look, that would definitely be fascinating. I mean, I think the jury's kind of still out in NASCAR on the charter system, but obviously we've seen, NASCAR move to that, and we know that Roger Penske is clearly interested in, he kind of, even in his statements yesterday where he said he's not going to make a comment yet on whether he wants guaranteed entries for the Indy 500, he did make sure to make clear to note that yes, the teams that invest in making this series go all year round deserve benefits from that. And so, that was part and parcel of what led to the charter system, where now these teams kind of have what essentially is a franchise, and you can run NASCAR races without a charter, but it's almost financial suicide if you're trying to make a business out of it, because the amount of money that's allotted to teams that have charters versus teams that don't is remarkable. I mean, it's like 100 to 1. So, you're exactly right. I think it will be fascinating to see what Roger does, even beyond the guaranteed Indy 500 entries, which may be a fait accompli, unfortunately, potentially for those who don't want that. Even beyond that, what is Roger going to do um, to try and help teams and make sure they're financially sound? There obviously IndyCar has the Leader Circle program. It gives teams that amount of money per year as long as they run the full season. I think it's what, 2 cars per team, or maybe a little bit more, maybe three, and so that are allowed to get that money. So yeah, I think there's definitely still more to be done to make teams on better ground. We saw what happened with Harding Steinbrenner. That's not necessarily ideal to have this new team come in and get all this hype, and within a year they have to basically fold into Andretti Autosport. So there's still more work to be done to make teams better and get them on better ground. Motorsports is a tough business. It always will be. Not necessarily always will be. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but it's always going to be, for the foreseeable future, tough to make this, not necessarily hard to make it a business. It's not hard to keep the doors open, but it is a tough business. So I do think that we're going to have to watch out to see how Roger can try and sculpt this thing and make it better for teams. Can he bring in more sponsorship dollars? If he can bring in more sponsorship and if he can get more for media rights, then that's money that can go directly to teams. You know, Part of the reason why IndyCar's price, the combined price, was what it was, is because of the fact that, from what I understand, it's really been IMS that has always really made the money and helped prop up the series. The series has not been that much of a moneymaker, and that's partially because there's not a crazy amount of sponsorship and there's not a crazy amount of media dollars. So IndyCar has a lot of potential globally. If they can get a lot of more dollars from global media companies, hopefully in time grow their ratings, get more money from NBC, get more sponsorship. These are things that are going to be able to help the teams, and you'll be able to redistribute that. So it's going to be really interesting to see, to your point, how does he set it up, and is it a straight franchising model, or is it a something? Is it which is essentially straight out of stick and ball traditional sports, or is it a little bit more of a hybrid? So that is going to be a fascinating topic to watch. I definitely agree with that.
Okay, we have a lot of topics to break down from what you've just said because you've covered a lot of ground that I want to get into a little bit more. I do want to read a couple of super chats that we had come in. Corey Hart Sim Racing says Jay Penske seems like he has a much different agenda than Roger. Personally, I think Cindric would be the one to take over rather than one of the Penske sons. I would disagree with that. I know probably Adam, you would too. I think Cindric will take over Team Penske for sure, the racing team. But I don't know if Cindric has the corporate boardroom knowledge and experience that I think Roger's sons have.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that Greg was there says a lot. I mean, if Greg was nowhere in the picture, why would he have been there? I mean, yes, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a big moment for the family. So I'm not saying that, the fact that family members were at this announcement necessarily means they're the heir to the throne. But certainly his sons remain involved. Certainly Greg remains involved with the Penske Corporation. Um, Tim Cindric definitely, is going to probably get a raise. I think he's probably, like you said, going to do more with Team Penske. He's probably going to be that guy because, even Jonathan Gibson, who, again, he was the gentleman in the photo yesterday as well, on the other side. He's actually, coincidentally, earlier this summer, he just so happened to take a bigger role at Penske Corporation and kind of moved away from strictly being a Team Penske. So they've kind of had a little bit of brain drain there. They've lost Roger Penske. They've lost the top marketing guy. So I definitely think you're going to see Tim Cindric step up. But in terms of running the Penske Corporation and this Penske Entertainment subsidiary that's going to own IndyCar, I think it's more likely that it's going to either, certainly stay in the family, or at least, go to like more so like Bud Denker or Walt Zarnicki, who have been running that corporation alongside Roger as his right hand man for literally decades. But Tim Cindric is definitely going to get paid well, handsomely, as he should, as he gets a promotion here, which I expect he will in due course.
Gold Picard asked David and Adam, do you think Indy will go international again like in the past? Sao Paulo sounds good still, or an Aussie street circuit again. I mean, Roger answered this in the press conference at the Speedway yesterday. He didn't exactly indicate that there were major international plans. He did mention Canada and racing in Canada. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to mend some of the fences that IndyCar has burned down the last couple of years with Canada. But he specifically mentioned interest in another domestic race. So it seems like Roger, and quite honestly, in my opinion, quite rightly so, is wanting to focus IndyCar racing on the United States and making that work first before jumping out and trying to do what so many open wheel owners have kind of found folly in, where they try to chase dollar signs in China or Brazil, and it oftentimes will backfire. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was maybe last year, or maybe even this year, earlier this year, when there was a lot of talk around the Gold Coast possibly coming back, and IndyCar going back to the Gold Coast, more accurately. Some people, pointed out that even as far as like Team Penske, like Verizon, one of their sponsors, is not in Australia, and so, there's a reason why Formula One primary sponsorships cost like $40 million a year. It costs a lot of money to ship stuff, all race cars, parts, pieces, people all over the world. So, I do think that there are team owners who are not quite as keen on the international idea as some fans, because obviously, as fans, we don't have to pay for it, and so, I do think some of the people who are a little bit more in charge of the P&L, people who have to keep more in mind the dollars and cents, and obviously Roger Penske is the best motorsports team owner pretty much ever. So yeah, he owns IndyCar, but he's taking a motorsports team owner approach probably to that role. I do think that there's some people and team owners who are not quite as keen on far away races, unless there's somehow where a promoter or title sponsor subsidizes things so much that they make it worth it. Which is, even if you looked at some of the numbers that were coming out of the Gold Coast estimates last year, they were astounding. I mean, I forget the exact numbers, but it was like, I think they said it was going to be like a $40 million startup cost or something like that. I mean, it was big numbers. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Rogers more focused on, if we're going to go international, let's add a race in Mexico. And we got Pato Award just came back into the series, so, or like you said, add another race in Canada on top of Toronto. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that there's no chance that they do anything internationally, by any stretch. I mean, I haven't heard that. I do think that, I don't think Roger Penske is just going to necessarily rule by fiat and make every decision unilaterally. So if a good option comes up and his executives feel like it's worth doing, then I still think it's possible. Steven Starks, who runs promoter relations for IndyCar, he's a mover and a shaker. That guy makes a lot of moves internationally, and sometimes you see him pop up in random newspapers in, like, Argentina and things like that, and Brazil. And so they have been checking out lots of international destinations in recent years. I know that they've looked at Yas Marina, in Abu Dhabi, for example. There was a report a week or two ago about them looking at now trying to go to Sydney maybe instead. I spoke to people at IndyCar, and they said it's super premature to say that's even anywhere near happening. But, we did have some very introductory kind of conversations about the possibility. So I do think that they're still looking at international options. I don't think that's necessarily over by any stretch just because Roger Penske became the owner, but I do think there's a recognition by everyone involved that it's got to be the perfect opportunity, and they're not going to do it otherwise.
Speaking of options, Michael Jensen brings up a topic that I think a lot of people, including Roger Penske himself, have talked about when we're talking about events and future possibilities. Doubleheaders with NASCAR. Will it be easier? And I would say absolutely. I think it was on its way to happening, regardless of this sale happening. And now especially it's going to be easier with Roger having such good relations with pretty much everybody. I think it's going to happen. I mean, he talked about how cool it was that Joseph Newgarden went around the Roval, and I for sure think it's going to happen within the next couple of years, if not sooner than that. What do you think about, or know even about the doubleheaders?
I think you're right that, this probably would happen within a couple of years, a handful of years, even without this sale. It's certainly only going to probably help it, though, the chances of it happening. I think what to really watch out for is how quickly they can make it happen. 2020 next year is off the table. Can they make it happen for 2021, or do they have to start looking at 2022? Last time I spoke to Mark Miles, he indicated to me that, and by the way, last time I spoke to him, I'm going to speak to him tomorrow. Last time I spoke to him, he denied they were for sale, so I can't wait to talk to him about that one. But when I spoke to him as well last time, he indicated that NASCAR schedule for 2021 was pretty far down the line. And so he therefore said that it might be 2022 before it happens because NASCAR's pretty. Which, by the way, if we want to do a new NASCAR episode, that's pretty fascinating in itself. If NASCAR's close to being done with their 2021 schedule, because almost nothing's been reported about it as far as a done deal. That's partially on people like me to try and make happen. It's easier said than done, unfortunately. So I do think that it's most likely to happen at some point, by 2025 for sure. But whether it's 2021, 2022, that's the question. But I do think the fact that now Roger Penske's the owner, I do think that it increases the chances that it happens as soon as 2021. He seems like he's for it. Like you said, David, I mean, I think it was already trending towards this happening. But now that you got an owner in IndyCar who is totally willing to say, yeah, I'll accept a little bit of risk for this. We'll run on Saturday night. I mean, IndyCar has already accepted, you know, long ago that they would run on Saturday and let NASCAR run on Sunday. That's not a big deal from my understanding. So having an owner who's willing to take a little bit of a risk and financially, in terms of how they'll look, all these things that can only help. So what was it not going to happen without this? I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think it might have happened regardless, but I do think that this could hasten it and potentially make it happen in 2021 rather than having to wait till 2022. In terms of where it's going to be at, I think that's still to be determined. Clearly, Indianapolis Motor Speedway rises up the ranks now a little bit in Roger Penske's mind, I'm sure. Is that a great way to boost the Brickyard 400 and make it, something special again? I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, maybe that's sacrilegious to run Indy cars on the same weekend. Maybe that's the way to reinvent the race and actually bring out a decent crowd for that weekend. So the possibilities are endless now that you've got Roger Penske in charge. And again, I do think it's going to hasten it, but there's no chance it's going to happen for next year.
Before we get too into the weeds into some of the minutia of Penske ownership, because there are a couple of points that I want to touch on before we go, kind of like Roger's relation with car manufacturers and some of the other things. You brought up something that was kind of interesting to me yesterday, and we've heard through various reports that there were other entities interested in purchasing the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I know Robin Miller's talked about Liberty Media. You and I were discussing the possibility of NASCAR being interested, but you talked specifically to me about the possibility of entities outside of the sport that might have been interested. What can you kind of say Roger Penske's ownership of this compares to how it might have been if, say, Comcast would have purchased this?
Well, here's the thing about it. I think what's interesting is that what Roger Penske brings is the absolute know-how of all things Indianapolis Motor Speedway and IndyCar. They know everything about the series. They know, obviously he'll know more than ever about Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but he knows a heck of a lot about it. They know how to put on events. They know how to be first class in hospitality and event planning and things of this nature. So I think what's great about selling it to Roger Penske is that you're going to get what the fans want, what the classic fans want, what the hardcore fans want in a first class manner. I think what's going to be interesting to see about what they can bring to the table and vis-a-vis maybe some other groups that could have bought it is when you start talking about a Comcast, when you start talking about an Endeavor, IMG, one of the global kind of biggest, marketing and sports agencies in the world that also owns the UFC, also owns professional bull riders. When you start talking about guys like that, they just have so many connections in entertainment and sports and media around the world that those things sometimes can open up some interesting avenues. So, for example, professional bull riders, they now do all sorts of stuff that you would have never thought they would have done before. They're getting their bull riders to be like models because they own modeling agencies. Endeavor, IMG owns like a modeling agency, so they're having their you know bull riders doing like photo shoots and things like that. Um, they do cooking shows and things like that with cooking influencers. So there's just kind of all these different kind of levers across, and we saw it this year with NBC. That's what NBC's tried to do with cross promoting IndyCar. They have so many connections, some of these mega conglomerates in media and entertainment and marketing that those are some of the capabilities that a traditional company that's kind of been more so in kind of transportation and car selling and truck leasing for years might not have quite the same capabilities or know-how in kind of that field. So I think that's kind of the trade-off is, the pros of Roger Penske is you're getting someone who knows this business like the back of his hand, and he's going to do the nuts and bolts very well. It's just going to be interesting to see what sort of kind of other ways to grow the sport that they can do. And I think they'll bring in very smart people. And they already have very smart people, of course, at IndyCar and Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So, they've got people who know what they're doing. But there are those kind of mega media conglomerates that could have looked at purchasing this and potentially did look at purchasing this, and they would have had some interesting kind of dynamics that they could have brought to the table, but they wouldn't have known IndyCar as well. So that's kind of the trade-off.
And one of the things, or one of the many things that Roger Penske was very conspicuously mentioning was the purchase of IMS Productions. You've mentioned them already. Back in the day, around the time the IRL Indy Racing League was formed, they used IMS Productions almost as a propaganda arm of the Indy Racing League, for lack of a better term. They actually, Tony George owned a local station in Indianapolis where they streamed all the practice sessions and would produce documentaries about the drivers and about the history. Again, there was nothing asked to Roger Penske about this, and nothing to indicate that he's doing that. But you talk about the conglomerates that own multiple entities in various forms of not only sport but entertainment, and the capabilities that they have. What's to say that Roger hasn't said, okay, let's get a production company that we can really produce some amazing content that we can put out on social media or out on television, X, Y, and Z, to help our exposure. And also, as you've also mentioned, Jay Penske is a media mogul. That's where he makes a lot of his money. I believe he owns Rolling Stone and a couple of other publications. So what's to say you can't stick the Indy 500 winner on the cover of Rolling Stone, with some hot chick or something, just to really get things firing on all cylinders. And again, the social media thing is the thing that I'm really excited to see where it all goes, because if you look at Liberty Media and what they're doing with the Formula One, not only their social channels, but with their YouTube, obviously that's kind of my wheelhouse. They are just doing, they are killing IndyCar with the content that they're creating, the quality of content that they are creating, the amount that they are creating. They are just so on the ball with relevant, interesting content that is getting incredible viewership for being auto racing content. You wouldn't think that race highlights would get 1.2 million views in 24 hours, but here we are sitting looking at the United States Grand Prix highlights, 1.2, 1.5 million views. And this is the thing that really frustrates me about the former management of IndyCar, is that they unlocked this potential before Formula One did, and they did nothing with it. When the Alonso test happened in 2017, they got 1 million viewers on one car going around the track at a test day. That kind of exposure they can't even get on television anymore, and they got it on the internet for a one-car test. And I could not believe that they chose to not only not invest in that platform, but then to put it behind a paywall with NBC Sports Gold. And I understand that they had to do the television deal, and that may have been a part of it. But boy, oh boy, I can't help but feeling they missed some opportunities there in the last couple of years. And I'm just hoping that Penske won't be the one who's missing those sorts of opportunities in the future?
Look, you can't have a TV deal, and also get them to not, basically the reason why NBC dropped Formula One is because Formula One insisted on launching an OTT service in the U.S. That would, be available in the U.S. So I don't blame IndyCar for not being able to have an OTT product in the U.S. But globally, boy, it sure would be nice to launch one of those things, right? I mean, and then we'll see what happens in the U.S. long term. I mean, forever is a long time. Maybe eventually we get to the point where you don't want to be on TV. I think in this day and age, I think it's a little bit premature to say that so many people are watching things digitally that you don't want to be on TV. I think that's just flat out wrong. People still watch TV. And so enough people still watch TV where a property like NBC, I don't know if they want to go straight digital. I just feel like, that day on the Indy 500, you're going to want to be on TV. And so I can't blame IndyCar there, but certainly, yes, let's see what they do from a digital perspective. It's definitely very ripe. There's a huge amount of growing international interest around IndyCar, started by Fernando Alonso, kind of furthered in other ways in recent years. This kind of renaissance of international interest around IndyCar. So let's see what Roger Penske does. I agree. I mean, they've got IMS Productions. It's a great company. Again, they do stuff even beyond motorsports, and they still help out with the NBC coverage to this day, from my understanding, in certain regards. Can IndyCar launch a real OTT network? It's certainly something to keep an eye on. NASCAR is working on an OTT network. We've reported that, and they pretty much already kind of have shown their hand by their fanschoice.tv, which is going to be what eventually turns into their OTT network. Stay tuned for some more reporting from us on that. So NASCAR is making developments there. So yeah, let's see what Roger Penske can do from a over-the-top streaming perspective. I agree. Social media is a big thing to watch out for as well. I think IndyCar's already been doing a better job of showing highlights on social media right away, but there's certainly more things to do. I agree about what you were saying about the Penske games and how that's a good sign. I mean, one thing about Penske is that, his people know sponsorship. They know marketing. Penske might be 80, but his people are very well versed in marketing of this day and age. And so, yeah, I do think it's going to be interesting to see kind of what he can do from a media perspective. The thing about IndyCar, just going back to it again, just from a broad perspective, is it's this kind of asset that was the reason why it was kind of, even through some of the denials that we were getting from people like Mark Miles, the reason why people felt like there was always eventually going to be a sale was because it was clear that this is kind of a diamond in the rough asset that stands to be invested in more. And so, I think the Holman Georges have done a great job, clearly, as stewards of this property, of both properties, for more than half a century. But there's, even if you talk to people about IndyCar's offices, I mean, even IndyCar's headquarters is, from what I understand, it's a little bit old, and so it's just this property that stands to be invested in more. And it feels like there's value to that can be unlocked under the proper circumstances. So I agree. From a media perspective, that's going to be a huge thing to watch, and hopefully we'll be on top of that in terms of what their plans are.
Yeah, I like the little plug. This is a good opportunity to say, go subscribe to the Sports Business Journal to read Adam Stern's stories, and for free, go down in the description right now, click on his Twitter link, and if you have Twitter, I don't blame you if you don't, but if you do have Twitter, be sure to follow him, because he's one of the best sources, as you can probably tell from this live stream, of the business side of racing. Really good follow, and leave a like on this stream if you do enjoy it as well. So there is a segue we can make from your last point, Adam, and that is the relationships Penske has across the business world, specifically car manufacturers, because that was something that Roger even brought up, the importance of bringing in one, or as he said, I believe in the press conference, two new manufacturers. In the past 20 years, he's had relationships with companies that are no longer or not in IndyCar racing at the moment, such as Ford Motor Company, Toyota, and Fiat Chrysler through the Dodge brand. And of course, he currently has relationships with Honda and Chevy, which are both in IndyCar, and then Ford still has a relationship with them in NASCAR. But also, as you mentioned, Roger Penske can go to a Fortune 500 company. They will listen to him. They will sit down with him. Can you put it into words what the difference between Tony George and Mark Miles calling up, let's say, ExxonMobil and trying to get a sponsorship deal versus Roger Penske calling up ExxonMobil and trying to get a sponsorship deal?
Well, one thing I could say is I remember a couple years ago when it was the team's 50th anniversary, SBJ did like a 50th anniversary special package on Penske, and I wrote a good bit of it. And one of the things I remember is we were researching kind of, the man Roger Penske, how he makes the team go, why they've turned into such a good sponsor kind of proposition. And one thing we learned on top of the fact that apparently they have some pretty good prices and they're actually pretty affordable sponsorship prices given how well they run. On top of that, Roger Penske learns his sponsors' businesses like the back of his hand, and to the point where Marlboro and their parent company put him on their board of directors. He gets on the board of directors for the companies that sponsor him because he learns their businesses so well, and he's such a respected businessman. I remember I spoke with someone from Miller Coors who said that there was one time where they were having like an employee event, and Roger Penske flew all the way through the night back from some event in Europe to like Chicago just to attend an employee event for Miller Coors. So the point is that the guy is not only deeply respected, but he learns the businesses of his potential partners very well. And so that's a great combination if you're IndyCar trying to land new OEMs, because he knows these car companies so well. He's so well respected that they're going to give him the time of day to make a pitch. Now, look, at the end of the day, the car business is going through so many kind of major changes and upheaval that at the end of the day, IndyCar getting a good new owner is not on it in and of itself, in my opinion, going to make an OEM join the sport. I don't think that the Holman Georges were keeping in and of themselves OEMs away from joining. But again, Roger Penske being one of the world's, or certainly America's, one of the biggest car dealers, someone who's been, so well respected and so well versed in so many different types of businesses, including motorsports, but beyond it, he's going to get the time of day from these OEMs, and he's going to be able to give them the best possible pitch. And knowing what they're going through and knowing how they're planning for the future in this world where we're going through electrification, particularly obviously in Europe, where some of these car companies have to do it by a certain time. They're facing huge financial pressures. So I just think it gives IndyCar as a really good chance to approach some of these companies, reapproach some of these companies, and have someone who can speak to them and understands the car companies' languages, because he knows what it's like. He is in that same business. But again, that being said, maybe it's somewhat obvious, but I do think it would probably be overdoing it to think that in and of itself, just Roger Penske becoming owner is going to make a third OEM enter. I think it gives IndyCar a better chance, and hopefully it does happen, but it's going to have to be the right value proposition. It's too big of a commitment from an OEM to do it just because they like Roger Penske.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's the other thing that I kind of discussed yesterday was, I think, again, to kind of the things that Roger Penske was talking about yesterday. He said he's talked a lot about breaking glass and taking risks. If there's a risk that he needs to take or a change that he needs to make to the sport to try to get an OEM in there, I believe that Roger Penske is going to be, and that's because of what a good businessman he is, he's going to be more willing to make a change or make a tough decision than I think the Holman George family were. I don't have to, you don't have to say it, but I believe that the Holman Georges definitely became stagnant, especially in the last few years of their ownership. They weren't particularly active, and like you've talked about a lot, making investment, which is such a major part of a business and running it. We weren't seeing that as much as we had in the past, and to be honest with you, and it's weird because I am a traditionalist. I'm a person who's going to fight to the death on this locked in spots thing. But at the same time, I think the Holman family was almost too traditional in that they were so worried about spoiling the Indy 500 or doing something that was wrong. They didn't do anything at all. And I don't think Roger Penske is going to be that guy. I mean, great example. What we had earlier this year with the IndyCar was making a bunch of public statements that, we're not doing hybrids, we're fast and loud, blah, 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 blah. Until Porsche tells them, no, we want a hybrid system. We don't want to join your series. And then they backtrack and say, hey, guess what? We're doing hybrids now. I feel like Roger Penske owned IndyCar would have maybe either listened to Porsche or known already that Porsche was interested and was not going to say yes until there was electrification involved in the regulations, and then bring them a hybrid proposal to begin with, rather than saying, here's a proposal for an engine that doesn't involve electrification or doesn't involve a hybrid. Like you say, due diligence is one of the huge things that the Penske Corporation and Roger Penske do that not a lot of other businesses seem to do for whatever reason, and that's why he's so successful.
Here's where you're right, is as a property, you got to kind of create FOMO for OEMs and sponsors. You got to create that fear of missing out. Esports is kind of going through it right now. Esports is getting so much press and buzz, some of it potentially undue to certain extents in terms of how much they're being hyped, but nonetheless, it's gained so much attention that brands have a fear of missing out right now in esports. IndyCar, and so by Roger Penske coming in and investing a lot of money in Indianapolis Motor Speedway, investing money in IndyCar, that is going to plus things up. That is going to make things fresh, new, and exciting, and that can create that virtuous cycle. That can bring more fans in. Attendance is up, viewership is up, sponsors want to come in. So you got to create that fear of missing out, and that's where I would certainly agree with you, is that while I'm not sure the Holman Georges were in and of themselves keeping anyone from coming out, they certainly could have been contributing to sort of a lack of new investment, which was making things stale. And you can't be a stale property in this day and age. You got to continue to invest. The world's changing too quickly on too many fronts to not be continuing to invest. So I definitely think you're right. Having this new energy, having this new investment, that can absolutely kind of swing the pendulum in their favor. What if IndyCar had made the decision quicker on hybrids? Would that have gone Porsche in? Potentially. I'm not aware either way. It's certainly a fascinating debate, and it'll be interesting to see if they can get Porsche back to the table. So yeah, again, what Roger Penske can do is he can create a virtuous cycle of really good things happening. And when that happens, it's like Formula E. Formula E doesn't have the biggest fan base, but OEMs have a fear of missing out because there's so much buzz around Formula E from a car electrification standpoint, and they've made this kind of great pitch about this is the battlegrounds to prove that you have the best electric car, and this is going to be the future. So OEMs have that fear of missing out. IndyCar needs to get back to making a better value proposition, and investing in the company will help make that happen. So that's where I think Roger Penske can make a difference. And obviously you get him in the boardroom and the guy's going to do a great job as well. So it really is largely a win-win for IndyCar. There's not a lot of bad aspects of this deal, I don't think.
When you talked FOMO and esports, and by the way, congratulations on your esports coverage as well. That's been kind of fascinating to see pop up in my timeline because, of course, it is an emerging entertainment property. But when you talked about that, as you kind of got to, the first thing I thought of when you said FOMO was Formula E. In terms of a motorsports perspective, because like you said, not a very big fan base right now, but good Lord, look at how much money is flowing in there, and it seems like they have just a line out the back door of people that want to be involved, or manufacturers that want to be involved in that series. But since you've kind of been covering esports, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question, I mean, whose bell have I got to ring in the IndyCar office or Penske Entertainment? At what point do they realize that maybe they should take a look at having some sort of an IndyCar video game as a platform to not only have an in-house esports league, but also to, at the very least, introduce young people to who the hell Alexander Rossi and Colton Herta are?
I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually a great point. Having spoken to Mark Miles about kind of their esports slash video games plans, um, it sounded like they did this review of their options with Gfinity, a company that's kind of in the gaming slash motorsport space. I think they've done some work with McLaren's esports program. Gfinity has. It sounds like they came to the conclusion that they need to do more in esports, but that they're not quite ready to make the dive on doing a full game. And so, there's certain things that Mark Miles is not going to tell me. And so if I pushed him on exactly why, I probably wasn't going to get why. But I think it's probably safe to assume that was probably a financial holdup. That they don't have the proper situation yet where they could do it in a manner where they felt it was financially feasible. Does that change now? Is it a situation where you needed an owner to say, I'll take a little bit of a bigger risk and put it on myself to make sure that, if this doesn't sell, we're going to take the hit on it, things like that. Could that happen now? So that is a good example of the sort of thing where maybe we can see a tangible difference from someone who's willing to invest a little bit more and take a little bit of a bigger risk. So yeah, I mean, it looks like again, IndyCar is planning to have a bigger presence in esports this year. I don't know if that means with iRacing. I don't think it does based off of some indications I got from someone from iRacing, but I could be wrong. So we'll see what that exactly means. But it didn't sound like a new game was 100% in the offing by any stretch in the very near future. That was 3-4 months ago. A lot's changed since yesterday. So yeah, let's see what happens and whether there's a change there.
That is something that just makes me want to pull my hair out sometimes. I mean, I get that the NASCAR Heat isn't the most amazing NASCAR simulator, but at least it's on the freaking Xbox store. It's like somebody can stumble across this game or stumble across a YouTube Let's Play or a stream on Twitch of the game and go, hey, this is kind of cool. I wonder when the next race is and check it out. But again, hopefully the Penske media group will kind of look at things a little bit differently than the current management has on that one. And I'm going to stop going there because I'm ranting a little too much. And thanks everybody who put their ones in the chat for support of an IndyCar video game. Last point I have here, and then we're going to kind of open it up to some viewer questions before we wrap it up. One of the things that I think a lot of NASCAR fans maybe lamented about yesterday was it definitely seems like Roger Penske is going to renew the vows, so to speak, with the Brickyard 400. What does a Roger Penske run Brickyard 400 look like? Because I know he was talking a lot about supporting the troops and the excitement in his voice about not only being able to honor them on 4th of July weekend with a race, but also because that's a great marketing opportunity for a NASCAR event. So, I mean, it almost seemed to me like the Brickyard 400 was on its last leg, dying breath, and now suddenly it looks like Roger's going to try to come in here and give the event CPR. I think even he said it's been going on 27 years. He wants it to continue on for 27 more. What can Roger Penske do to the Brickyard to revitalize it that hasn't been done already?
Surprisingly, from what I've been hearing, NASCAR wants to continue on even before this deal. I've been hearing that in recent months. NASCAR wants to continue on. I only say surprisingly because, of course, unfortunately, the race has lost so much of its luster as attendance has fallen. It's obviously, a race that does have great history, and it is cool, I think, to have NASCAR at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Look, I think there's a recognition that absent, NASCAR getting Haley Deegan and Bubba Wallace into Hendrick Motorsports cars and suddenly, lighting the world on fire and having SportsCenter want to come out and having this whole gigantic, kind of renaissance with their fan base and having new fans come in, absent that, you got to kind of eventize this thing. So you got to add events. They've already been doing that, bringing in kind of concerts around the Brickyard 400 in recent years. They had a nice crowd this year for some of the concerts, and I know they were significantly up over year. Again, is this where you could possibly have an IndyCar doubleheader? Do you do it around a Brickyard 400? It is, obviously it's a little bit of a crazy idea. I mean, it seems like almost sacrilegious, in certain regards to try and suggest it. But is that the sort of wild idea that they can try and do to revive this? I mean, look, IndyCar is huge in Indianapolis. I mean, NASCAR has a nice presence there too if you look at the TV ratings, but IndyCar is big in Indianapolis. If you have Indy cars somehow involved with Brickyard 400 weekend, does that really help things out? I mean, there's only so much you can do from entertainment perspective. They're already bringing out some nice kind of artists, and the night before, things like that. So it'll be fascinating to see what sort of ideas they can come up with. I know IndyCar has been, one thing, by the way, just as a quick side note, that hasn't been tried, and I've talked to Mark Miles about it, and it just seems like it's too tough. And I think, understandably, they need, the Indy 500 is what makes this entire series go. So I understand the need to keep the Indy 500 selling well, but one option is creating some sort of dual ticket. If you buy a ticket to the Indy 500, you get to go to the Brickyard 400 for $5 or something like that. 300,000 people buy tickets to the Indy 500 every year. That's a lot of people to run the Brickyard 400 potential buy. If you give them a heck of a deal and you tell them it's going to be a lot of Americana and we'll bring out some Indy cars and do an exhibition race, I don't know. I mean, the possibilities are there to try and kind of tweak and change it up. But clearly, it doesn't seem like NASCAR on its own right now in this day and age currently has the star power to just engineer a massive attendance revival. So it's going to take, putting kind of events adjacent to the Brickyard 400, I think, to kind of create this buzz, and, doing it on a holiday weekend, a big Americana weekend. I mean, obviously it's hot as heck in Indiana in the summer, but that people do like to go out in events, obviously still nonetheless at that time, if it's, 4th of July, things like that. So I think there's still some levers to pull. And I do think, I see both sides of it. Sometimes you see NASCAR at Indianapolis Motor Speedway these days, and you're like, man, maybe this race should come to an end. But they are two historic racing brands in America that I could certainly see the argument for why they should continue to try and work it out. And as you said, it seems like that is the case now. Again, I think I was already hearing that NASCAR wanted to continue on there, but it doesn't seem like there's any doubt about it now.
That's an interesting point you brought up about the dual ticket, because back in the day when IndyCar, or at least the Indy Racing League, went to NASCAR circuits, those tracks, which were ISC owned, would actually do some sort of a package deal. You couldn't get a Cup Series ticket unless you also bought an Indy Racing League ticket. And what they saw was the IRL crowds were actually damn good, because they already got the people who were purchasing NASCAR tickets to purchase these IndyCar tickets, and they said, why the heck not? It's a race. And so you would see full grandstands at places like Kentucky or Kansas or Chicagoland, and it was kind of the rising tide that raised all ships from that perspective. Now, obviously, it's a little bit more difficult to do that without a NASCAR boom, but like you said, the Indy 500 is kind of impervious to that sort of thing. There's 300,000 fans there, and if you give them an incentive to come back, and a double header, I think, is really interesting as well from the perspective of doing it at Indianapolis. I always kind of thought that the best place would be the Charlotte Roval, because you would be kind of thinking you want to expose IndyCar to the NASCAR crowd rather than expose NASCAR to the IndyCar crowd, because I guess kind of would assume, because it's a smaller fan base, you would think that the IndyCar fans would be more aware of NASCAR than NASCAR fans would be aware of IndyCar. But putting it on the Brickyard weekend, or doing some sort of an IndyCar exhibition, that's an interesting idea, and I would kind of like to see them explore that a little bit, for sure. So right here towards the end, we're going to open it up to a couple of viewer questions. I know I had another super chat that came in, and then we'll let Adam go, who's been so generous with his time. So we had a one about 30 minutes ago from J.O. by Mac, €5, to ask, 500-mile Triple Crown and more oval dates to the IndyCar calendar returning under Penske ownership, ? So I think there's been a lot of speculation about going back to Pennsylvania, specifically Pocono or Watkins Glen, because, of course, Penske is based in the northeast of the United States. He was born in Cleveland, Ohio. He went to school in New Jersey and based his race team for the longest time in Reading, Ohio, and still has or Reading, Pennsylvania, and still has the truck company there. I think selfishly Roger Penske is going to want an event a little bit closer to where his people are. But what do you think, Adam? More oval events or a 500-mile Triple Crown? Do you see that in the cards under Penske ownership?
It's tough to say. I mean, I think I hate to kind of be right in the middle of the road. But what happened with Pocono was kind of such a weird deal, particularly how it happened by the end of it, where you had Mario Andretti basically trashing IndyCar for their decision and calling drivers who didn't want to drive their sissies. It was just a bad ending, unfortunately. But look, I think, from what I understand, the Igdalski family, it was left on amicable enough terms where I think the Igdalski family that owns Pocono is still open to bringing IndyCar back. The crowds had gotten better there in recent years. I mean, it seems so soon. I mean, they just dropped it, so I don't see that happening immediately. Whether they can add some sort of oval back on, hopefully. I mean, that race at Fontana a couple years ago was unbelievable. One of the best races I've ever seen in my entire life. And then that was the last race they've had there since. So, unfortunately, the crowds weren't there. That's kind of, unfortunately, IndyCar's kind of paradox where, the crowds are tremendous for street courses and road courses, but the racing, unfortunately, is not necessarily always as crazy and which sometimes is as exciting as at ovals. And yet, unfortunately, sometimes these ovals is a little bit tougher to bring out a bigger crowd. It's proven to be. We saw that with Phoenix. So I think, unfortunately, IndyCar's a little bit, once bitten, twice shy with ovals right now. They've seen that they've had some issues with attendance at them. But why? I don't think by any means they can't try it again. And again, keeping with this thing we've been saying all night, I do think Roger Penske, he's a very smart guy. Penske is a conservative company overall in terms of, they don't do anything too crazy. But I do think he's going to take some risks. So, yeah, I mean, I remember when I spoke to Mark Miles when the schedule came out after a couple months ago when the 2020 schedule came out. And he said, don't read too much into the notion that we dropped an oval, meaning that we're never going to add another oval back. It's just kind of the way it worked out this year, for next year, et cetera. So I think IndyCar could absolutely go to an oval again. And it's going to be interesting to see, who they would add. Is it Pocono? Is it Fontana? Is it, a trip back to, Michigan? It's going to be interesting to see.
That was one of the things that encouraged me about Penske buying this, because back in the kart days, or one of the bases of forming kart in the first place was the track owners also did not feel they were getting value out of the series. It wasn't just the car owners. So one of the things that kart was formed on was that the track owners would be given the sufficient resources and promotion to be able to host events that were successful at the racetracks, meaning there wasn't a revolving door that they had been seeing in the 70s, and now unfortunately we're kind of seeing the renaissance of that, where we just see, especially the oval tracks, like you said, just there you add Fontana, you add Loudon, they leave, you add Pocono, it stays around a little bit longer, but it's gone. Phoenix the same way. So. I kind of hope that Roger is able, and the Penske group, the Penske ownership, is able to reevaluate how things are done in terms of track promotion, and hopefully you see more stuff like Gateway, which just, I mean, I think Gateway took everybody by surprise how well they've promoted that event and have been able to generate a crowd for an IndyCar race on an oval on a Saturday night in the year 2019. The success of the Gateway event is something that I thought we'd never see outside of Indianapolis again. So that, it can be done, and I just hope that Roger and his group bring the right people in. I guess that's another thing that I guess we should touch on, because I don't think we touched on it quite too much, since we're not getting too many questions in the chat. We're not getting any super chats. Do you see Roger clearing house, or do you see him kind of sticking with many of the people that are working there right now?
I think certainly to start, he's going to stick with the people that are working there right now. Things are on the uptick. He's not necessarily buying in at some disastrous time. At the same time, I think he's going to bring his own people in certain key ways. So again, kind of going back on what we were saying earlier, to be determined whether Jonathan Gibson, his right-hand man from a marketing sales perspective, gets a specific title at IndyCar, or whether he just kind of has oversight. but there's no question that his people are going to be in meetings now and, kind of doing, kind of helping out. Now, look, I mean, I'm not saying that necessarily his people are going to start saying it in every meeting. I'm not saying that by any stretch, but clearly Penske bought this for a reason. I mean, Penske did not buy this just to continue status quo with the exact same thing, exact same way everything was going. I mean, he's going to come in, he's going to evaluate the business. Everyone heard yesterday at his press conference, he has this great kind of way of just going in and saying, what's our top 10? What's the top 10 things we got to work on? So I don't think he's going to clear house. I think most likely you're going to see Mark Miles stay for at least a couple of years, probably, minimum, or maybe he's there for much longer. I don't see him immediately leaving, but that's just my guess. We'll see what happens. Sometimes crazy executive changes happen out of nowhere, at least as far as when we learn about them. And two, even if that's the case where he's going to keep most of the people around, I think you're going to see some changes in certain regards. So again, it'll be interesting to see whether some of his kind of right-hand men get formal titles at IndyCar or whether they don't. But clearly, I do think he bought this to try and put his imprint on it. And at the same time, he's not going to try and fix things that aren't broken. So I'm not saying he's going to go in and micromanage by any stretch. And I don't think he's playing to immediately clear house. But I'll also be surprised if a year or two from now there's been no changes, no additions, maybe even no people leaving. Within a couple of years, I think we'll see some changes like that, and we could see some changes within a couple months.
A lot of questions in the chat about on-track product. I don't know if you really have any comments on that. I mean, I can only really take Roger Penske at his word, what he talked about yesterday. He said the on-track product is as best as he thinks it's ever been. So I don't think he's going to make too many sweeping changes to that, at least at the moment. Again, the only way I can really see any major regulation changes, at least from deviating from the current plan they have to replace the chassis and engine in the next couple of years, would be to try to attract a manufacturer into the game with some sort of different rule set. But I don't think there's any real changes to the product, because I think as we both established here, Adam, it's not really a product problem. It's a marketing and promotion problem that's really kind of holding it back.
Yeah, I mean, Roger Penske is way too smart of a businessman to try and fix things that aren't broken. Like, that's not his way of operating. That is not his way of operating. He's not someone who's going to come in and say, well, I own it now, so let's change everything. Like that. That's just not what he does. So, I think the on-track product, I mean, look, clearly there's certain things that can continue to be improved. Jay Fry is already hard working away at those things. We'll see what happens this year with the aero screen and whether there's some unintended consequences there. Does that affect the racing and the setups, and does that make the racing better or worse? I mean, there are going to be some things to watch out for that'll be interesting. But yeah, I would agree with you. If he makes some changes to attract a third OEM, I think that's certainly feasible and potentially viable and something that could happen. But I don't see him coming in, and I don't know what he would massively change from a competition perspective that is glaring and needs to be addressed, that would be there, that he would need to do something like that. Again, are there kind of minor things here and there that maybe help out teams with maybe in their minds cost savings, things like that? Sure. But I just don't see where he would come in and make a massive change to the on-track product and car. They're already planning for a lot of these changes, and those are already in the works. With the new car, new engine in the coming years, things like that. So, or new engine, excuse me. So, yeah, I just don't see where he would come in and instantly make a huge change to the on-track side.
The one thing that, of course, is going to be a debate, and it's probably too late in this stream to really get into it, but I will say it seems like the locked-in spots is going to be the real battleground in the next couple of months.
Yes,
whether or not it happens this year or next year, and by this year I mean 2020 Indy 500 and next year 2021 Indy 500. That's going to be where the things are really decided. And here's the thing that I've kind of theorized, and let me know once I kind of get done with the point if you think I'm wrong or right on this. But in my opinion, Roger today has less of an incentive than 2 days ago to lock in spots. I feel like there was such a backlash this May or this spring when all this started to come out, and even last year when they kind of talked about it a little bit. The customers are clearly speaking that they want this to remain. Roger Penske is no longer just a car owner, and it kind of goes back to that whole conflict of interest thing. He is now not only the purveyor of the Speedway, he's the purveyor of the series. He can't just look out for Roger Penske anymore because he will hurt himself. And I would definitely wager that this investment is probably a higher priority on his list of things than the team is, the Team Penske. So if keeping bump day means that there's one extra profitable day or more media attention drawn to the Indy 500 throughout the month of May, I think that is already a reason that Roger Penske would be much more considerate of keeping it. The other reason is, look, and I'm speaking to all 423 people who are watching this and probably thousands more who will watch over the course of the next few days. And I'll probably have to make a video on this just to kind of get this point out. But you have to realize that as fans of IndyCar racing or even as media members, we are now Roger's customers. And our voices matter a hell of a lot more to Roger now than they did before he made this sale yesterday. So if you feel passionate enough about bump day staying, just make your voice heard. Don't be abusive or anything, but, tweet at IndyCar, tweet at Team Penske, tweet at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Let your voice heard and make it loud and make it proud like it was last May, and they didn't make a change. I think as a customer, as long as you make a big enough noise, as a businessman, Roger Penske is going to hear you. He's going to hear you. Now, of course, there's the consideration of protecting the car owners, but I think the fan base now has an equally loud voice to the car owners right now, at least from where Penske's business interests now stand.
Yeah, two things I'd say. One, just kind of going back on my first point. To your point, when I say nothing's going to change, kind of on track in a major way, I totally agree with you. I was kind of excluding the topic of this with the guaranteed entries. That is definitely something that is going to be something to watch. I think as far as kind of the car itself, I don't foresee anything major, but I do think clearly this is going to be a major topic to watch. As far as what's going to happen, I think you bring up a really good point, because I was hearing this myself this year when the topic was coming up about whether to do it, and I guess maybe late last year, in terms of guaranteed entries, is the notion that Mark Miles and the Holman George family, like, they don't work for the teams, they work for the fans who, obviously they do work for the teams in the sense of, like, the teams they make the sport go, you can't work without them. But the notion, what I was hearing was that, there's a greater sense of recognition by Mark Miles that, yes, I need to sell 300,000 tickets. I'm not quite as worried about, I am worried about teams if I'm Mark Miles, but I'm responsible for selling 300,000 tickets, and nothing comes above that in terms of, my business priority. So I think you do bring up a really good point in the sense that, yes, they are going to pay attention to what their fans want. And if there is a big enough stink that is kind of caused or brought up kind of while they're mulling this over, that is definitely going to be something they're going to take into account. Now, the one flip side that is going to make this something fascinating to watch is, again, for better or for worse, Roger Penske is a race car team owner, and he might be kind of stepping back, but it's like Donald Trump going to become the president. Like, it's still the same person who's going into that role. And so, at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting to see whether Roger can kind of divorce himself from his race team owner instincts enough to where he's going to give this a fair shake. And really, if he really feels like the majority or vast majority, or even slim majority of fans don't want guaranteed entries, is he going to listen to that? I would be way overdoing it to say I know right now. I mean, I just don't know. If someone knows, then it's probably like Walt Zarnicki and Bud Denker, his right-hand men, who probably he's told him what he really thinks he wants to do. But unless you're one of those few people on earth, I think anyone would be overdoing it to say they know what he's going to do. I do think you're right. If fans cause a big enough stink, he's going to definitely take that into account. At the same time, the Indy 500, as big as it is one day a year, and there's 360 so other days that he's going to have to worry about the rest of the series. And in his mind, he clearly feels like he made it very clear. Now, whether he has a change of heart, let's see. He might. I definitely think it's possible, but he clearly felt last year and this year that team owners invest enough where they deserve to have guaranteed entry. So it's going to take a lot to kind of reverse his feeling on that. But at the same time, 300,000 people and their thoughts is a lot. So I do think it's going to be one of the top topics to watch over the next year or two here, because it's clearly coming to a head. He did a masterful job of kind of taking the question yesterday, making his point, and at the same time, not breaking any news and saying, I'm not going to talk either way, one way or the other, about what I ultimately think is going to happen. But it's clearly something, a topic that's coming to a head. It's a very passionate topic, understandably. I mean, Bump Day has been amazing in recent years, and it's a very historic part of the Indy 500. So, yes, I don't foresee a lot of major controversies coming over the next year or two in terms of the on-track product with cars, but in terms of guaranteed entries, yes, I do see that controversy coming.
It's going to be fascinating to watch this all develop over the next months and years and decades. It seems like this may end up going on. So again, thank you so much for coming on, Adam. I really appreciate it. Make sure everybody who's watching this right now, go down in the description, follow him on social media, subscribe to the Sports Business Journal. Adam, give me some final thoughts here on this pretty momentous occasion in the world of auto racing.
Yeah, it's just crazy how quickly it happened. It's one of those things where I'm going to talk to Mark Miles most likely tomorrow, and one of the first questions I'm going to kind of have to review with him is like, okay, like, you sold Clabber Girl and you said we weren't selling, and then at the end of the season, like you said, we're not selling. So, just kind of figuring out how it all happened. And I don't hold any grudge against Mark. It's just strictly business. And he's doing his job by not making a big deal about it and keeping it out of the press. But it's just kind of remarkable how this, storied family in American motorsports has just, before our eyes, really exited out of nowhere. And I think it makes a lot of sense that Roger Penske bought it, but I don't think he would have been the first people would have guessed if they didn't know. I don't think he would have been the first name. So I think it makes a lot of sense, but it's just it's fascinating on so many levels. This is going to take a while to unpack. The conflict of interest thing, to go back to that, like, whoever wants to think it's fair or unfair, it's going to come up over the coming years here. It is going to be something to continue to watch. There's just so many layers to this. So, look, I mean, I think, could we see a day, an announcement related to NASCAR that is similar in magnitude over the next 24 months? Absolutely. And that's going to be a big day as well, if and when that happens. But yesterday was a huge day for motorsports history, and it's just crazy how it snuck up out of nowhere. I kind of went over on my end, how it kind of happened. You saw Robin Miller kind of put a column out today on his end about how it happened, how it kind of slipped through the cracks with him. And these things happen, and they did a great job of kind of doing this very quickly. If you go back to Liberty Media's acquisition of F1, that thing took like 6 months. And it was leaked to the media probably 4 or 5 months before it ultimately closed. So when you look at the difference of how quickly it happened, how they were able to do it so stealthily and keep it away, it's funny, there's a couple people now tracing back my steps who, there's different leaks to reporters. So, I mean, sometimes someone just leaks something right on their own, and other times you got to maybe hear a little bit about something first and then go try and pry it out of other people. And this was one where, in retracing my steps over the last 24 hours or so, there was a couple people who actually I could have probably pried this out of. So it was just amazing how it happened, and they did a great job of doing it very quickly. But boy, it's a momentous deal to kind of drop out of nowhere. So Yeah, I think yesterday's a deal. We'll all, is a day we'll all remember for quite a while. We're going to be kind of, it's almost like, BC, but this is BP, before Penske. So, we're going to be kind of looking at this as a momentous day. Yesterday, as hopefully it works out well for the sport, but one way or the other, it was a major kind of era ending yesterday. So just a lot to come, I think. There's going to be a lot of kind of knock-on impact from this. So from my perspective, I'm looking forward to trying to stay on top of it.
That's a very interesting point about NASCAR, because I'm sure you're well aware, but for the viewers who maybe aren't quite as up to date, I mean, there are some moves being made that are very conspicuous, very similar to the Clyburn girl thing that happened with IndyCar, I think last year or whatever, last May. I mean, the ISC NASCAR merger, there's a big red flag right there, at least in my estimation. It's like, oh, hey, look, they're putting all their assets together into one corporation, and that's a lot of real estate there. There's a lot of value there. Just saying.
And by the way, they went private at the exact same time their rival, promoter from 60, years ago did. So both in the same year, ISC and SMI go private. ISC merges with NASCAR. Look, if 2 years from now everything is exactly the same in NASCAR, I'll be as shocked as I was yesterday, because there's some big news coming in NASCAR. I don't know what it is yet, or I would have already broken it. And I don't know if it's going to be tomorrow, or if it's going to be a year from now. But there's going to be some more seismic moves to come, and they might involve Roger Penske in certain regards, and they might involve IndyCar in certain regards. So again, I think we can kind of say this was BP. I mean, yesterday was before Penske, and now it's after Penske. So a lot to come. But yes, you are right. I do think, the major moves in American motorsports from a seismic perspective are not done yet. There's still some more shoes left to fall.
We are living in the AP era. Thanks to AS, Adam Stern. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure when the NASCAR news eventually breaks, we'll have you back on, or hopefully before then, because I do enjoy these chats, and I hope everybody else does. Give him some love in the chat, and be sure as well to check him out again over at the SBJ and on Twitter. Just such a great source of auto racing and esports information, as I've kind of realized in the last couple of months. So yeah, this has been fantastic. Thanks to everybody for turning out. And again, big thanks to Adam Stern. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsports content. Like the video. Do all of that stuff. And if you enjoyed this, again, leave a like on it. Thanks, guys, and we will see you in the next video.